Still going. I saw. There we go. Oh.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Real Investing Show. This is Stephen Earp with my co-host, the great Taylor Davis.
Good
Taylor,
morning.
how are you? And we got a really special guest that I'm just meeting today. So, Taylor, why don't you introduce Russell?
Yeah. So this is Russell Hunt. We've known each other for a little while now, a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And I've learned so much from this guy, honestly. Like he's on another level. He shakes his head like he's not, but he really is. So Russell, tell us a little bit about you. You are obviously, this is a real estate investing podcast. So you do real estate investing?
I do. I started out in the residential game back when I was in college, buying pretty low end rent houses, all that I could afford. I did that for quite a while. I really enjoyed that side of the market. I like helping people get into properties that normally couldn't, and I like to buy properties that most people don't like. I still do that to this day. But I started out in residential, and I did all types of investing. This was back in the mid to late 90s. But I did flips, and I did rentals, and I did, wholesaling, even though it wasn't wholesaling back then.
Yeah.
It was a different world back then because there wasn't so much, there wasn't so many people in it, and there wasn't so much knowledge about real estate investing back then. It was kind of a different world.
Yeah, really along those lines. How did you get into real estate? Because it's not like you had all the podcasts that you do today and the resources. How did you decide to get into real estate?
Yeah, I was gonna say why. Like, why did you choose?
I had a professor in college my freshman year who was a personal finance professor, and he would come in, and before class he would talk about real estate. He would talk about the real estate he owned, and he kind of got me excited about it because I was thinking, I could make money without having to work. It sounded like a dream job. So I thought, man, I'll just buy real estate, and then I won't ever have to have a job. And so that was really my goal, was to just start buying real estate, start collecting money, and not ever having to actually work. And so he got me really excited about it. And so then I started doing research, and I went to the library. And at the time, this was, like I said, back in the early 90s, there was like 3 books on real estate in the entire library. It was ridiculous. So I, of course, I read those books, and I really started studying until, I thought I had to be 18 to buy a property. So I waited and just practiced and learned the market more than anything else. And then the month after I turned 18, I started buying as fast as I could.
Really? So, okay, once you turned 18, so you start buying. Are you buying and holding? You buying and flipping? What was your strategy there?
Everything I was doing at first was buy and hold. I didn't know any different because
Sure.
the only people I had seen do property just bought the property and kept it forever. So I thought that was the only way. I didn't know any different.
So I'm interested in your very first property. What was your very first deal? Like, how did you buy it? You say you waited till you were 18, but like, how did you buy it? How did you finance it? How did you find it?
I found an ad in the newspaper, in the classified ads, because that's how I found properties back then, was in the classifieds. It was a little 3-line ad. It was house for sale, $10,000. It was a 2-bed, 1-bath. I went over there, looked at it. The gentleman that met me there was the owner. He was 70.
Oh, he was 70.
Yeah.
Oh,
He'll come back.
yeah. I wonder if he.
Okay.
There he goes. All right.
Back.
Now I'm on the edge of my seat. He was 70.
He was 70 is what we heard.
Okay. He was 77 years old, I think. And he had owned this property for a long time. And so he was like, are you interested? And I mean, I looked at this house, and I mean, I'm just blown away that I can buy a house for $10,000. And the house was in pretty good shape. I mean, he had just had a tenant move out. He didn't want to mess with tenants anymore. And so it was decent. And so I was like, oh, this is great. So, I told him I wanted it, and he said, well, I don't want all the money. And I was like, okay. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you'll give me $3,000 down, then I'll finance the rest of it. And I had no idea this was even an option. So I was like, sounds good to me. And so I gave him $3,000 that day. And then for some reason, he ended up selling it to me for $8,000, or no, $8,500, because I financed the $5,500 over 3 years.
Wow. Okay. So your first deal, the seller says, I want to finance this for you.
Right.
Or I just want to know, like, just to be clear, this is an elderly gentleman and he was only asking 10 grand and you beat him down by $1,500.
I don't know how that happened, because I wouldn't have known to even do that back then. I had no skills whatsoever. So
yeah. So then did you have to fix it? Did you just straight rent it out?
All I did was we put new flooring in there. We went and put carpet in, and we probably, looking back, I didn't need to do that, but I didn't know any different. So I did that, but that was all I did, and then I rented it.
Wow.
So okay, so let's fast forward a few years later, because you've got a tenured career here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go into like 2008 happens, right? Like this is so market goes kind of crazy in 2003, 4, 5. Things are great. Then you start to see things kind of shift, and people
in 2003, I had started seeing the shift. So in 2003, I started selling.
Okay.
And at that time, I had about 100 houses, and I started selling them off. And when I started putting signs out for them for sale, people would call me and they would ask, they wouldn't ask how much the property was. They would ask how much it was down and how much a month. And once again, me not knowing anything about anything, it was kind of a light bulb for me that, that was how I had to sell these houses. And so that's how I got into rent to own, was kind of by happenstance, just because people were calling me, asking me how much down and how much a month.
Okay.
And so between 03 and 05, I ended up selling practically the entire portfolio on rent to owns, because the numbers weren't making sense anymore. The rents hadn't hardly gone up at all, but the property values had doubled. And so I decided I better get out while the market's good. And so I sold most of them between 03 and 05.
Okay, so then you start selling. So, and most of those you sold on a rent to own owner.
I would say I sold probably 80 to 90% of them on rent to owns.
Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. So out of curiosity, how many of those ended up going through, and how many of those did you end up getting back?
Almost all of mine went through, because I didn't want the properties back. I mean, what I found out is I really like just collecting the payments. I don't like to do all the maintenance. I don't like to do all the tenant customer service work. I like to just collect the payments. So I made sure I got enough money out of them that they weren't going to just hand them back to me. Okay. So most of mine would go through just because of the way I set them up to begin with.
Okay. So then you've got 100-ish houses. 80 to 90 of these are being sold on a rent to own. You've got great passive income coming in at this point, right? You probably got a decent amount down. And so you kind of realized some cash. What did you decide to do next as you're starting to see, hey, the residential market isn't where it's at? What did you start to pivot to?
For the meantime, there for a few years, I didn't do a whole lot. 06 and 07, I didn't do near as much in the real estate business. It was a tough time for me, because I still didn't know a whole lot about real estate, except for to buy and hold and do rent to owns by that point. And so the market was kind of weird for me, because the market had ran up so much that it was hard to buy them and be able to sell them like that. So what I did was I waited until 2008, and in October of 08, I started buying again. Okay. And that was kind of after the crash, as the houses started coming back in price.
Okay. So you wait for these prices to start coming back down, and then you start coming in and finding other older people to take advantage of.
The market changed, so there was opportunity again. And once there's opportunity, then you have to act when the time's right. And in the end of 08, then we started buying again as fast as we could, and then all we were doing was rent to owns.
Okay. So history tends to repeat itself. I want to get back into like your transition and commercial and all this. And yet right now, I want to go ahead and what's your take on today's market?
It's in transition, especially with interest rates where they're at. The market is going to continue to transition because with interest rates where they're at, the prices have to come back down because you can't continue to pay the same prices and get the same return you could when interest rates were at 3, 4, 5%. Now that they're at 6, 7, 8%, the numbers have to change, and that's going to take a little bit of time, just because the sellers don't want to realize those losses yet.
Okay,
but it's coming. I mean, it's gonna get to the point where some people are going to have to sell, and then people are going to have to realize that their prices aren't where they used to be.
All right. So you're in a hold mode right now, kind of waiting for kind of like you did in 06, 07, or
no, we're closer to that 08 time frame. I mean, we're getting to the point where the market's about there. It's just going to take a little while.
Okay. So 2008, you start buying back in. You're buying back in residential again?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I was doing all rent owns then. And I say that I had bought, I had started buying commercial mixed in, because kind of my thought was I was going to do rent to owns on residential, and then I was going to buy and hold commercial.
Okay.
And so in 08, we bought a mini storage, a pretty big mini storage. In 08, we bought a couple of industrial buildings, smaller industrial buildings. And then in 2009, we bought a big shopping center. So we were buying commercial at the same time as we were buying the residential.
Okay. What made you transition to, because you don't do residential anymore, correct? Or very little? Okay. So how did that transition come about? When was that? What took place? And actually, before we get into that, I'd really love to know, how did you decide that you wanted to go into commercial, and if you're doing residential, you're going to do it on a rent to own?
The residential rent to own was mainly just out of my comfort. I don't like to do repairs and maintenance. It's not my specialty. I'm not real good at dealing with that whole project and the contractors and everything that goes into that. So, it was better for me to do, rent to owns, because what we would do is we would go in, back then you could buy great deals that didn't need a whole lot, because pretty much all we did was paint and carpet. So I would buy these houses, I would go in, we'd put new paint, new carpet. I would take a down payment and start collecting payments. And I just did that over and over and over and over again. And we were doing 4 to 6 a month. So we were turning a lot of these, but we weren't doing any major construction. We weren't doing any, rewires or re-roofs, or we didn't have to do any of that back then. So
where were you finding your deals?
I was buying a lot off just an MLS. But then it was a lot of real estate agents were bringing them to us, because it was there for a while. Almost any property that came up under $25,000 in Oklahoma City, we were buying. So, and there was a few of us that were, but it wasn't like there was a bidding war. There was very few buyers. So we were buying them about as fast as they would come up, and then we still had to do the work. So.
Gotcha.
Now, were you doing some kind of, at this point, did you just have enough cash saved that you were able to do that? Did you have a line of credit that you were using? Like, how did you construct these deals, or were you trying to do creative financing on the purchase?
We were using bank financing on everything. And I never had any trouble with financing all the way through the recession. We continued to be able to get bank financing whenever and for how much ever we wanted. It was you hear all these horror stories, but we were able to still continue to get bank financing. But I had a lot of good relationships. I had relationships with multiple banks. And so when one bank would slow down, another one would pick up. So, we were still able to get financing. But I think the key to that was we had some cash, we had some equity. We could make it worth the while of the bank, that they knew they weren't going to have to worry about it.
There you go.
That's good. So so you transitioned from, what did you say, 2009, mostly over to commercial at that point?
I didn't go fully into commercial until 2012 when Dodd-Frank passed. I stayed doing rent to owns pretty much up until Dodd-Frank passed. And then once Dodd-Frank passed, I got out of it completely and went strictly to commercial.
Okay, real quick. So this passes, you say, I got to get out of this. You have at this point, I mean, probably 100 or a bunch of properties that you're selling on rent to own. Did you just let those continue as they were? Did you try to sell them to another investor?
No, as long as you had done the deal before, it was like October of 2012, they're still grandfathered in. That you could do those before Dodd-Frank passed, but after Dodd-Frank, you couldn't initiate any new ones.
So can we just give a quick explanation of the Dodd-Frank Act and how it impacted investors?
Dodd-Frank technically says that you can't do rent to own. You can't do anything that looks like an owner finance to a person that's going to occupy the property. Okay. And so there's still lots of people that are doing it. There's ways to that people are structuring them. I didn't want to take the liability with as many as we were doing. I didn't want to become a target, and so I just decided it wasn't worth the risk for us to keep continuing on them.
Right. How did it impact the ones you already had in place? Did it impact them, or just impacted starting new ones?
It just stopped the new process.
So 2012, I'm done with the rental side, so I'm done with the residential side. I'm moving to commercial. What'd you start doing?
Same thing I was doing before, just buying stuff and holding it, and kind of back to the same game, buying really lower end properties that most people would overlook.
So how are you finding your commercial deals, through this time?
Well, now, okay, commercial's a whole different animal, because the commercial agents they're different than residential agents in the fact that they don't just like to put their property out there and let everybody look at it like MLS. On the residential side, most agents, they get their properties on the MLS quickly, and on the commercial side, most of them want to double side most deals. So they'll delay putting them out, and they'll call people, and they'll let people know that, we need to, we don't want somebody to act fast so that we can get this sold, so that we can get both sides of the deal. So very few of the deals ever hit the market. And the other thing is if somebody knows what you're looking for, they go out and find it on the commercial side. And it's something like 65 or 70% of all commercial deals are sold off market. So it's really a matter of letting people know that you're in the market and that you're what you're looking for, and waiting on those agents, because they usually find the deals before everybody else does. Because a lot of times there's only so many sellers in the commercial side. There's a lot fewer owners. Mm-hmm. And so you have to find the agents that know those sellers.
So how'd you get into? Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's more about networking and just maintaining those relationships. And I assume with the agents that deal in that, like, you've probably had a relationship with some of them for a long time at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how'd you start going about being intentional of like, hey, I'm going to start building these relationships?
I mean, it's like everything. I wasn't good at it. I got lucky a bunch of times. Luckily, the market back then was in the position where they didn't have a whole lot of buyers. So the people that were buying, when we would make offers, then it was a lot easier back then, because there wasn't as many buyers. There weren't as many buyers. So I got really lucky in that fact, because I wasn't as good at networking as I should have been.
And did you have a real specific criteria? Like, I'm looking for industrial in this part at this price, or what?
No, I would buy the thing that kind of got me most of my deals was the fact that I would go and I would tell these agents that I'll put a number on anything. I'll put an offer in on any type of property, any type of location, I'll pretty much put a number on anything. So if you just need an offer for your seller, that's where I come in. And so a lot of them would call me because nobody would make offers on some of these properties. And it was that kind of time. So
and you'd be like $8,500.
Yeah.
Do you still have a relationship like that, or do you still have a philosophy like that in certain?
Yes.
areas?
Oh yeah. No, I'll put a number on anything. If somebody desperately wants an offer, I'll put a number on any type of property anytime. Yeah.
So that's fascinating. First of all, I mean, my grandparents were in real estate, and we bought our first house when I was 19. I have not networked with as many investors as you guys have, but I will say this: I have never heard anyone say that before. Everywhere you go, people say you want to have a very specific buy box, and here's what you're looking for. But what I hear you saying is, my buy box is, I'm going to get, if I can get it for my price, I want to have it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And no, that is definitely unique, because most people like to sit on a certain asset class in certain areas. And, I've never felt like that, restriction was going to be good, because there's obviously there's a deal everywhere. So it's just a matter of numbers. I mean, it's all about our numbers.
So the idea, normally, I don't want to just camp on this for a minute because I'm fascinated by this. So normally you think about like the key to one of the major keys to success is focusing and continuing to do it over and over. And I think that's why people say you need to have a very rigid buy box. But what I'm hearing is your intense focus and work is just to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it.
Relentlessly.
What about geography? Are you exclusively in this local area, or do you spread out beyond that?
I kind of go back and forth. I always say I would rather the properties be somewhere that I'm going to drive every day, that, they're going to be something I'm going to drive by. In that, I've got properties that are an hour away now. I try not to do those things, but if the deal's right, then I'll buy anywhere. So, in saying that, I'm still not going to go outside of about an hour, because if I have an issue with a property, I want to be able to drive there and look at it and check it out. I don't want to own stuff in other states. It's not my cup of tea.
Interesting.
So you start, is there a specific asset class that you started to see, okay, I'm getting more of these deals? Or are you just pretty all over the board in your asset classes?
Well, I end up with a lot of industrial, mainly because of pricing. If you get larger industrial that were vacant back in the late 2009, early 2010, 11, there was a lot of vacant industrial. And so I ended up with a lot of vacant industrial because of that. You don't run across hardly any vacant anymore because of the marijuana business. When marijuana came into Oklahoma, it took up almost all of our vacant industrial space. And so now, obviously, I'm not getting as many of those. And so, it adjusts with the market. And the market just, at that time, there was a lot of vacant industrial.
So once you started to see that there's no longer a vacant industrial and everyone's going into industrial, did you start selling some of those off?
I did. Okay. And then, once if I give what the market gives me, or I take what the market gives me. And if the market's giving me cheap property, then I'll buy. If the market's, overpaying, then I'll sell. So I just kind of do whatever the market changes to.
I love it. How did you tell us a little bit about when did you start getting into hard money lending? And real quick, tell us what hard money lending is.
Well, hard money lending is pretty much just loaning to investors that are buying property, similar to the way that the banks do it. I mean, and in the grand scheme of things, I operate a lot like a bank. I'm just a lot easier to deal with. I started doing that in 2009, and it was pretty much I was doing these rent to owns, and I was like, the thing that would make this easier is if I didn't have to go in and rehab the house, meet with the person, do all the paperwork and everything. So I thought, why don't I just loan money to these other people that are doing the same thing I am? So I started loaning money then, and it just kind of blossomed from there.
Okay, so now you do a lot more today, correct? Of the
Yeah, I really got serious about it in like 2016.
Okay.
I kind of figured out exactly what I wanted to do on that side, and then started really ramping up how many loans we were doing.
So why would an investor come to you rather than going to a local bank?
Speed and ease. We don't require anything from them. To look at a property, all we need is a copy of their contract, pictures of the property, and how much they want to borrow. So with that, I can analyze a deal within 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, and tell them if we can do it or not. And so, if somebody wants to close quickly, or they don't want to provide everything that a bank needs, and they don't want to have that, waiting and not knowing, and a lot of people just come to us for ease and simplicity.
And most of your clients that are doing this, so they're an investor, is their plan to go in, we're going to use your money to buy the deal, rehab the deal, and then they're going to either refinance it or sell it within a shorter period of time?
It depends. It depends on the timing. In 2009, almost all of our people that were buying holds. They were buying them and renting them, and they would keep our loans for years because it was just so hard to get financing.
Gotcha.
Now, over the last few years, we did a whole lot of BRRRR type deals where they would use our money to buy the property. They would go in, and then they would refinance us out. We did a whole lot of people were buying and fixing them up and reselling them. Now that's kind of transitioning again because the banks are getting tighter and they can't get out of them as easy. So, we're keeping the loans a lot longer. So it kind of just changes with the market too.
Give what the market gives you.
Right.
Yeah.
But we would rather keep our loans long term if possible. So it's better for us if we can keep them longer.
Gotcha.
So are you? Do you have? I mean, this is, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a meta question, but like, do you enjoy all the different markets, or do you go through a season where you're like, this is just not fun right now?
I don't like it when the market's as hot as it has been. That's when that's my least favorite time. And it was the same way in 05, 06, 07. Yeah, I don't like those markets as well. I really like the down markets, the recession markets, because I become a lot more active because there is so many more opportunities. Yeah. And in 2008, 9, and 10, there was opportunity everywhere. You couldn't keep from tripping over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I feel the same. What I feel like is negotiating and things like that. It's just, you have more options now. It's like where for a couple of years here, it was like your only negotiation is give us your highest and best offer.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's like, well, okay.
Well, and I feel like the last couple of years, if you were a short-term flipper, right, you were doing okay, because if you were off on your number, if you bought a deal and you were off on your numbers, the market probably saved you, because during that 6 months it was going up, right? And so like you could have been in a break-even situation or even a loss situation, and you come out ahead in this market. Now you're going to see people that have created bad habits during that market. And
I've already been seeing that. Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of whoops because the market's not going to say, in fact, if anything, you got to run your numbers as a loss, right? Like the market's depreciating. You got to run your numbers that way. Real quick, let's wrap this up. Russell, I want to know, what advice would you give someone who is brand new to investing, interested in investing, kind of on the fence? What advice would you give them right now?
I mean, it's going to be a really good time to buy. I mean, this is the time where you make your money is, as the market turns, and right now it's in the process of turning. It's just, we've got a little bit more time before we get there, but it's coming.
Okay. So be prepared.
Definitely.
Start looking for deals.
Definitely.
Any resources, book, podcast that you recommend?
I try to listen to everything. I mean, I read a lot. I watch a lot. I mean, between podcasts and YouTube, I spend hours a day on them. I mean, I try to keep up with what's going on, and I try to keep, enough knowledge of the market to know where the market's at and where we think it's going to head, because the more you can know that, the more advantage you have whenever you're looking at deals.
Love it.
It's awesome.
One book. Recommend one book.
You know, the one I started with back in the 90s is still one of my favorites, and that's Nothing Down by Robert G. Allen. It was actually the original was written in the 70s, and it's still just a really good book.
Nothing Down. I have not read that.
It's super old. I mean, it's a really old book.
Okay, so that's the first real estate book I ever read.
It was one of the first ones. Like I said, there was only 3 in the library at the time. So
yeah, I read it in the early 90s.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And then there was the second one I read. I forget what it's called. Anyway, for like 2 weeks I've been trying to remember who it was. It was a Brown book, and I remember seeing it, and I read it over and over. But anyway, some other it was. If I mentioned the name, you would know him. It wasn't Robert Allen, but it was some other one of the early guys. So it dealt mostly with cash flow. A lot of the early stuff you read was only about cash flow. They didn't talk about appreciation much. Where appreciation is really where the massive wealth comes, but cash flow is what allows you to continue. So anyway.
Well, for so long in Oklahoma, we didn't have appreciation. So it was good not to bank on it. But now, we've really had a lot of it in the last few years, but I don't think that's going to continue over the next few. So
yeah. Awesome. Really great to meet you, Russell.
You too.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, this is a lot of value. I love your perspective. I'm going to be thinking, honestly, I'm going to be thinking for the next 2 weeks or a month about the concept that you don't focus in on. It's not that you don't focus, but you don't have a very exclusive buy box. That's really what it is, I guess.
Yeah. No, I definitely keep my possibilities open.
I love that. That's really encouraging to me, actually. And so, cool. Well, thank you guys so much. Anything else before we close up, Taylor?
No. Hey, this was great, Russell. As always, I appreciate your insight.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Appreciate you guys thanks, Russell, for being on. And thank you guys for watching or listening, wherever you're listening from. Let us know who you are, where you're from. Please like, comment, and share, and send us your questions about real estate investing or anything we can help you with. Thanks a lot, guys.
Below.
Yep. See ya.